Okay, so good evening, everybody. Fine. So, as you have seen that in yesterday's class, we had a discussion over the paper 1 basically, and in fact, as far as the analysis of paper 1 is concerned, I believe that it was quite a doable paper, right? आप ये नहीं कह सकते कि paper नहीं कर सकते थे. Undoubtedly, I honestly accepted that there were a couple of questions, they were quite tough questions, right? And they were quite tough questions, and in fact. Okay, fine. So as I told you that they were quite tough questions, and in fact it is also true that maybe that you're not in a position to write the answers in a very skillful way, but it is also true that it is also true that you could have written something. These are basically the connections. Maybe you're having lesser idea, that's quite possible, quite it is quite acceptable, but then the answers could have been written. On the contrary, when it comes to paper 2, I believe that paper 2 was more doable, in the line of more doable. And in fact, immediately after the paper, the students called me up and then said, "Keep world history was slightly tough." Frankly speaking, when I saw the paper, I did not find the world history also very tough. Rather, they were in a very expected line. ऐसा नहीं था कि themes आपको पता नहीं है, ऐसा नहीं कि आपके पास बहुत सारे ideas नहीं है. हाँ, there were certain questions I found in this paper. They were quite factual in nature. So when they are factual in nature, then it becomes very important that you write all the important facts in this, and that is very much true for modern India, and it's very much true for world history also. So there were a couple of questions that were quite factual, and in fact in paper 1 also we saw that couple of questions were quite factual. So this is true that couple of questions were factual, and if you're not capable of writing all those necessary facts in the answer, in that case it is really going to become tough for you to get very good marks. But then rest of the questions I believe they were quite okay. So let's have a discussion, right, and then only we'll discuss that whether the paper was on the tougher side or on the easier side. Let's have the we'll be able to understand that. So okay, fine, we'll be going for the second second paper. This is section A, right? So the Sikh monarchy was Napoleonic in the suddenness of its rights, the brilliancy of its success, and the completeness of its overthrow. But you remember, this is part of question number 1, and the moment it comes to question number 1, as you all know that in question number 1 normally you need to be a bit analytical, right? That's the most important thing that you need to keep in mind. So while having the discussion over this, I'll keep on telling you that what are the sources from where they have been taken. That's also very important. So in fact, it is basically one of the early interpretations of this of the rise of Sikh state, and it was given by one of the British administrator, right? That's called as Lepel Griffin, right? He himself was basically a British administrator, and since he experienced this Anglo-Sikh war or the rise of not Anglo-Sikh war, the rise of Sikh state, and that's how he was giving or he was writing just his own observation of it. So this is also quite known to you that ultimately Napoleon was contemporary to Ranjit Singh, and that was also one reason because of what he had been making these kind of connections. Otherwise, frankly speaking, there is no connection between the two. Yet this person is writing about it. So the two things I did tell you, that a person who observed him very closely, and since Napoleon was contemporary to him, that's how he came up with this kind of statement. That's one. And the second thing, you should understand, it is basically you need to go for the critical analysis, and that's why you cannot write only one-dimensional answer. Rather, you need to write the other dimension also, right? So let's discuss about this question. So what are the things that could have been included? So you can write the period of Ranjit Singh or the rise of Sikh state, and you can write Napoleon was contemporary to it. And in fact, one by one, there are 3 dimensions that you need to discuss. You need to just a second. You need to touch, and what are they? Suddenness of its rise, that's one thing. The brilliancy of its success, that is the second thing, right? And then the completeness of its overthrow. These are the 3 dimensions that you need to touch. This is a 10-mark question, right? You have lesser space, and in fact, you need to finish it also earlier. In that case, it really becomes tough to incorporate or inculcate all these ideas in one answer. So it is undoubtedly challenging. That's why you don't need to go for huge amount of explanation. So you can write about, you can start with Ranjit Singh, you can write, okay, this is the period in which Ranjit Singh comes to the power, 1799 to 1839. Now this is the period of Ranjit Singh. Then you can also write the period of Napoleon, and you can also write that Napoleon at one point of time was one of the most powerful person in England, and at one point of time Ranjit Singh was also considered to be the second strongest power in Asia. That is how these reflexes are there, or these kind of portrayals are there. Now one by one we'll be picking up all these ideas. Suddenness of its rise. Now it is believed that Sikh state has almost was almost done, almost dead. So you have seen that the way they tried, the Sikh gurus have tried to convert it into a militia or a sort of political power. But then after the demise of the last Guru, Guru Gobind Singh, ultimately the Sikh state could not remain very powerful. It got disintegrated into the mist. And after the coming of Ranjit Singh, in a very shorter span of period, and that period I must say it was the period of I must say 8 years or 9 years. To be more precise, I can say 1792 to 1799. These are the years in which Ranjit Singh started that process of consolidation, and ultimately he did it. So undoubtedly in this particular span you find that this particular status or Sikh status emerging. On the other hand, if you'll see the Napoleon, Napoleon was also the result of what? French Revolution. So Napoleon also all of a sudden came into the power. Otherwise, Napoleon was never into the picture. But the way, the state was being questioned, or the monarchy was being questioned in the in France, that gave this chance to Napoleon, to come to the power. So in fact, that's the reason because of it, some sort of parity or equality is being, or some identical features could be noticed. Then it comes to the brilliancy of his success. So basically you see the success of Napoleon in what? The wars, that's one important area. The second is about the administration. I hope you remember the Napoleonic Code, right? That was his administrative success. So these are couple of successes of Napoleon, and in fact you can find certain similarities here also, because Ranjit Singh was also a good diplomat, right? The way he was dealing with the ruler of Afghanistan, the way he was dealing with the British ruler, or let's say the British power in India, and in fact some other neighboring powers. So it was undoubtedly he was a great diplomat. At the same time, he's known for a good a powerful military, the modernized military. Then he's also known for conquering or winning several wars. So these are couple of success, administrative success as well, because Ranjit Singh was a very good administrator also, and in fact he is known for consolidating the administration. And this is how you could talk about the brilliancy of its success, and then in completeness of its overthrow. So Napoleon and Ranjit Singh, both the powers ultimately came out of the power, or they lost the power in a very shorter span of period. Ranjit Singh died in 1839, and within the span of 9 years, let's say ultimately the Sikh power got finished. The same is true for the Napoleon also till 1815, right? The Battle of Waterloo, right? So suddenly you see that Napoleon, who had been enjoying great power in Europe, and because of some of the political changes in Europe, ultimately he lost the power. So somehow we see certain similarities. So this is one aspect in which you need to show it. Now you have to give the counter ideas also. The counter idea, suddenness of its rise. No, it was not a sudden rise. Napoleon may be the result of a sudden rise because of the French Revolution, right? But then you know that Sikh history is a long history, and in fact how a religious movement, a social movement converts into a first a militia and then further into a political power, and that's how a background was there with Ranjit Singh. Was there any background with Napoleon? No, Napoleon never had any background. So Ranjit Singh had a background. That's number one. And in fact, if you see that particular part of Punjab, so the Sikh missiles were already present. So what Ranjit Singh did? Ranjit Singh just united them. So you can't say that Ranjit Singh had a sudden rise. Ranjit Singh had a background, somehow he was capable of consolidating all them, and that's how he is emerging. So that's how there was no similarities between the two, right? Then it comes to the the brilliancy of success. Now Ranjit Singh and Napoleon were two different kind of personalities. As far as the objective and the goal of that fellow was there, Napoleon was there. Napoleon at one point of time wanted to become the ruler of at least the whole Europe, I must say. On the other hand, Ranjit Singh never tried to do so. Ranjit Singh just wanted to unite the Sikh state, and in fact fact, when he had signed this signed this Treaty of Amritsar, at that point of time, he accepted very calmly, okay, like, River Satluj would be the boundary between the British Empire and the Sikh state. So he never tried to cross it. He never tried to violate it. In fact, on the other hand, Napoleon was not of that kind of person, right? Napoleon was very different in nature. That's why I can say that Napoleon was like, somehow Napoleon was like different in nature. Apart from that, when it comes to the administration, Napoleon undoubtedly is popular for the Napoleonic Code. But apart from that, you should also understand that he could not somehow consolidate the other sort of administration, such as like political administration, revenue administration. He could not pay proper attention to it. On the other hand, you can find Ranjit Singh had been paying proper attention to it, right? So that's undoubtedly in terms of military, like both have tried to focus a lot on the military development. So that is true. And then finally, it comes to like the completeness of its overthrow. So was the Sikh power completely over even after the Second Anglo-Sikh War? No. Napoleon was completely over. Nobody nobody even remembered Napoleon after this Battle of Waterloo. So it was a sort of bad dream for the Europeans. On the other hand, you know that the Sikh state survived, maybe in form of subsidiary alliance, or maybe in a very minor way, but ultimately they survived. And in fact, the legacy of the Sikh state survived for a longer period of time. That's how we cannot say it was a complete overthrow. Rather, some elements of Sikh state was yet left, and that's how both the dimensions you are going to write here. That is how you're going to write the answers. Content is slightly bigger, I do accept. Now this is your talent remains in this. How you're going to confine it in those in just 2 pages. That is undoubtedly a sort of thing that you have to talk about. Okay, fine. Let's move to the next question. Next question is the seeds of domestic dissensions were thickly and deeply sown in the Maratha system under the Peshwas. पेशवाओं के अधीन मराठा व्यवस्था में घरेलू आंतरिक मतभेदों का बीजारोपण काफी घना तथा गहरा था. भयंकर लैंग्वेज इस्तेमाल किया इन लोगों ने, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, हिंदी इंग्लिश में ठीक लग रहा है थोड़ा सा. So this question is also very simple. I think there's no complication in this question. Now first of all, since it is asked in the modern part, and that's why you should precisely talk about which century. 18th century, not the 17th century. We are not going to discuss about Shivaji. We are going to talk about whom? Undoubtedly Peshwas. And in fact, they have given it Peshwas also. So we are not going to discuss the first part of the Maratha state. We have to precisely confine ourselves to the second part of the 18th century Maratha state. So now, in this particular part, whether you are you must be aware of this, as far as this Maratha state is concerned, in the second part or in 18th century, now this Maratha state had numbers of problems, right? So problems as in, first of all, before, or let's say this is a statement which has been taken from Jadunath Sarkar's book. Okay? So it is his statement. And in fact, Jadunath Sarkar, being a nationalist scholar, he himself accepts that what are the problems with the Maratha state, and ultimately that led to the decline of the Maratha state, right? So you need to write about, you can write with the reformation of the Maratha state in 18th century with the release of Sahu. Okay, he is coming and that it is reframed. But then after that, you need to write one by one the various factors which somehow secure the domestic dissensions in the Maratha state, right? So you will be writing that even during the period when the Sahu was imprisoned, Shivaji was not there, the Maratha polity survived, right? And it survived in which form? In a very fragmented forms. So you all know about the Maratha chiefs. So such as the Scindia, Holkar, Gaikwad, Bhosle, and so on. So there were several Maratha chiefs, they were there. And in fact, these Maratha chiefs were holding their power in a precise place. So basically, the Maratha polity was surviving. So after the coming of Peshwa, for the sake of name, they accepted the Peshwa as the head. But then this basic feature somehow continued as it is. In fact, the civil war within the Marathas, that also you know, that civil war between Tarabai and Sahu. Tarabai was also claiming, or let's say Shivaji second was also claiming to be a real successor of Shivaji first. But then there was a civil war. So that is the first thing. And that civil war was finally concluded with what? The Treaty of Varna, 1731. Okay, that is how it got concluded. That's one part. And then you'll be writing about this Maratha chiefs. So basically, the Maratha polity was in a shape of, or in a form of confederation, right? So it was not one unitary polity, rather than it was a confederation. And in fact, every Maratha chief, as you all know, that Scindias were from Gwalior. The Bhosles were from Nagpur, right? The Gaikwads were from Baroda. So basically they were holding their positions in their respective regions, and in fact, as I told you, that only for the sake of name they were accepting accepting the Peshwa as the head. Otherwise, frankly speaking, when you read about the Maratha success, at any point of time, it was not the combined success of the Marathas. Basically, the Maratha chiefs had been acting in their own way. किसी को Odisha conquer करना, सिंधिया चला गया बिना पूछे पेशवा से. He was not even taking the formal permission also from the Peshwa. So every Maratha chiefs had been acting in a very independent manner, and that's how there was no consolidated power. That's point number one. Sorry, point number two. Then coming to the third point, the most important point, बाकी बहुत सारी चीजें आप लिख सकते हैं, but then these 3 points should be there in your answer. The third thing, the third is about basically what? The third is about the some problem or certain dissension that you see at the lower level. So when the Maratha Sahu was not there, it was not in a very unified form. At that point of time, you can find some Deshmukhs and the Patils arose, and in fact they were the local revenue bureaucrats, right? At the time of Shivaji, right? But once there was no centralized power, these local Maratha revenue collectors they became very powerful, and in fact they stopped passing the revenue to any central or any higher authority, and that's how they also appeared. When the Sahu is coming back, when the Peshwa is gaining power, the Peshwa is consolidating everything. Even at that point of time, ultimately these local revenue administrators, they refused to pay the revenue to the higher authority, and whenever they had been asked for this revenue, they were showing their dissension, right? So they were ready to even fight with the Marathas itself, right, for not giving this revenue. That was another important point. So these are 3 important points that you need to talk about, right? Some social and some internal issues were also there, about the highly indisciplined Maratha army. That has also become one reason because of what ultimately the Marathas could not become very successful. Now these are the points which are proving it, whatever has been asked in the question. But then since you need to write some counter arguments also, so then towards the end you'll be also writing the counter arguments. Okay, fair enough, these points were undoubtedly there, but it does not mean the Maratha chiefs were not accepting the superiority of the Maratha Peshwa. And in fact, by the time Sahu is there, some sort of unity undoubtedly can be noticed. And in fact, on very frequent occasions, they had been meeting among each other, and the policies were being decided combinedly. Whether it's being followed or not, that's a different matter. But ultimately, they had been showing that the Maratha is one power. And in fact, when you read in the books about the Marathas, at any point of time, you won't be able to feel it or recognize it. The Marathas were very decentralized power. Rather, we always read it in the name of Peshwa or the Sahu. So it cannot be said that they were completely disseminated or decentralized. Rather, we can say that they were on certain occasions they had been showing or they had been coming up as a combined power. So whenever it comes to the collection of Chauth and Sadeshmukhi, whenever it comes to dealing with the Mughal power, right? So always Peshwa was being sent to deal with the Mughal power, or let's say whenever they were supposed to deal with the Nizam of Hyderabad, so it was the Peshwa. So undoubtedly they all were accepting the Peshwa as the head. Right, even though Sahu is there, Peshwa was accepted as the head. So that's why we can say it cannot be said altogether that they were completely decentralized. Some elements of centralization was definitely there, but unfortunately, the elements of decentralization became more powerful, or they became more imposing or dominant rather than the centralization. That's it. Okay, next question is an easy question, right? Bhagat Singh and his comrades significantly expanded the meaning and scope of revolution, redefining it beyond more political upheaval to include social and ideological transformations. It's an easy question, right? So you need to write. I think easily anybody can write this answer. Okay, fine. What is this question? The revolution was already there, or revolutionaries were already there, right? So revolutionaries that you see after 1897-98, when you talk about Savarkar and then the Abhinav Bharat and all these organizations were already there. And in fact, in both the parts it was there. In Bengal also you can find it, even in Maharashtra you can find it. In both the places the revolutionaries were there. But as far as these revolutionaries were there, these revolutionaries had a very narrow ideological base. They were religious, right? They were more confined to India. They were like, somehow also dealing with a sort of eliteness, right? They themselves were coming from some elite families and all. So that's, I'm not saying, I'm not universalizing it, but then these are some of the common features. When Bhagat Singh is coming, right, after the coming of Bhagat Singh, undoubtedly the nature of revolution got changed. Bhagat Singh was totally inspired by socialism, right? And that's how he changed the name of this organization also as Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, not Republican Association. It means that he was pretty inspired by the socialism. So what are the ideas, like, where you can find that there was some sort of revolutionary change? So first of all, I can say nationalism. That was like, redefined by them. So nationalism was taken to the next level. That was one ideological change. Then the second, like, they believed in the revolution. So basically the revolutionaries in the second stage, they had been fighting in two fronts. At one hand, a social revolution, the social revolution which wanted to free or upgrade, or sorry, uplift the proletariats basically of India. On the other hand, they wanted to fight against the colonialism. So this is what they had been trying to do. Then you know that Bhagat Singh, like, has written a couple of books, or not books, I'll say manuscripts basically. And there, like, he had accepted that I'm pretty inspired by Russian socialism, and he wanted to somehow generate a mass movement. In fact, what he did in the parliament, that was also the result of what? That was also the result of, like, the mass mobilization only. So this is how we can say, apart from that, like, in fact, Bhagat Singh was very categorically writing about not only fighting against the colonialism, but at the same time he wanted to mobilize the people in order to, like, fight against capitalism in India. And in fact, like, they were hating certain capitalist people, or the way capitalism was coming into India. That's how we can say that these people were trying to somehow get that ideological change. So, ये लिखना तो आसान, ठीक है? The point is that again you need to write the critical dimension, right? What you are going to write in the critical dimension? वहाँ क्या लिखोगे? ये तो कोई भी लिख देगा. As in? Okay. What else? No, you have to write the negative. Positive we have already written. Abhi negative likhna hai aapko. Whatsoever they have discussed, ultimately they practically could not implement in any of them. Though they had been talking about some broader visions and all, but then practically what were they doing? They were fighting against the colonization itself, right? So at any point of time, Bhagat Singh also, like, could not somehow generate or make the people aware or mobilize the people against capitalism, right? Or let's say against that kind of exploitation which was happening. So somehow, maybe in terms of ideas, they had many innovative ideas, but, like, in practical terms, they had been precisely fighting against the colonialism. They kept on fighting against the colonialism, and though they had been talking or they had been dealing with these kind of ideological ideas or ideological, like, concepts, but practically what happened, they also got involved and or got indulged in those, like, acts basically, such as the killing of Sanders, then the, like, the Kakori train conspiracy, the dacoity, and then, like, some other things, like, so they never could take it to, because socialism you cannot generate through this way, the way they, like, they had been trying to get. Basically for that you needed to mobilize the masses, so they might have worked more for mobilization, but unfortunately whatever they had been claiming, they could not act as per that. That's how you're going to write the critical dimension of it. Okay, next point. It is again a very simple question. The question is the significant features of Indian Council Act 1892, who was the principle of election which it introduced, though the word election was very carefully avoided in it. I think it's a very simple question. Okay? It's a very simple question that, like, has been asked. So what is this 1892 Council Act? So first of all, with a background, you'll be writing that what is this 1892 Council Act. So basically, like, from the name itself, it is very clear that it was a reform in the council, in the legislative body, right? And in fact, it was not a reform, it was basically an expansion in the central legislative body and the provincial legislative body, and it came due to the pressure which was being built by the nationalist and the extremist in India. That's how it is coming. Okay, so with the normal background, you'll be writing second part, the provisions, right? So in the second part, then provision is not the main part, and that's how you won't elaborate it. Simply write ki how come the expansion was being done, such as in the central legislative body, 16 to 20 members, like Indian members. So that's how the inclusion of Indians, which was initially precisely based on the nomination, now it is coming in form of what, like some sort of election, right? Though it was not election. So that's why this word has been highlighted, and they they have asked this question because it is the dhoka, right? What is it? The election. This was the dhoka. That is why this question has been asked to you. So what they did actually here? So they started with they somehow portrayed that they are getting a real democracy in India, and that's how they are increasing the number of elected members in the central and the provincial legislative body. But then further he'll be writing, after writing those provisions, that actually what was the procedure prescribed by them. Now what is the procedure? The procedure was that there were various bodies at the lower level, such as the municipal body, the university board, right, the commercial bodies, basically the trade bodies and all, right? So all these bodies were nominating. They were just nominating few of them. And once they nominated, after that, they further nominated few more people, those who are becoming part of Central Legislative Assembly. But there again, I must tell you that they were just recommending the names. Whatsoever names were being selected by those bodies, they were not becoming the part of the provincial or the imperial legislative body. Rather, once the names were being prescribed or they were suggested, Governor General, or at that point of time undoubtedly Viceroy, right, now he was selecting few of them. So there was nowhere the provision of election. So he'll counter this argument by giving all these things. But then again, you need to write the critical dimensions. So how you're going to write the critical dimension? Then you'll be writing one summarizing your answer, that though it did not mark formally the process of election, it did not mark the beginning of real democracy in India, yet it is considered to be very important because Indian people who had never any idea of democracy before, at least now they started coming to know about it. So undoubtedly it was not implemented here, but then finally it had to be implemented in 1909 Act, which was the next one, because once the Indian masses got aware of this, after that somehow the nationalist movement became more powerful and they started demanding the proper elections, and that got implemented in 1909 and 19 reforms. That's how we'll be writing this answer. That's all. Okay, again, very simple question. The colonial rule opened the Indian market for British manufactured goods and led to the deindustrialization of or destruction of indigenous handicraft industries, right? Now it is purely the debate that has been asked, but ye logon ne बेईमानी की है, ठीक है? This deindustrialization debate is so big that it cannot be written in 10 marks. But since it has been asked in 10 marks, now it is depending on your smartness, that how you incorporate in 10 marks, right? So the question is talking about deindustrialization, right? So it is favoring deindustrialization. And why the deindustrialization? That they wanted to secure the British manufactured goods in India. So let's start your answer from which part? From 1813 Charter Act. So okay, after 1813 Charter Act, the trade monopolies of British East India Company was abolished, and that was the free entry of the British manufactured goods in India. And once it came through the tariff policy, they control it, and that's how the Indian export was discouraged and the import of the finished material was promoted through the tariff. You can mention about the tariff also in paper 2. If you include these kind of facts, that is always good for you, such as there was 65% tax or the tariff was imposed over the cotton clothes, okay? 35% on the silk clothes. So there was heavy tariff imposed over the Indian clothes. So this is how they have done. So in the introduction, you can include all these kind of things. And then in the first part, he'll be writing about the scholars, right? Those who talk about or historians, those who talk about the deindustrialization, right? So you know that all the important scholars Bipin Chandra and all, they had been talking about the deindustrialization, ठीक है? So जितने important scholars हैं जो बात करते हैं deindustrialization की, बहुत detail में नहीं जाना है. You can mention their name in just one line and the arguments which were given by them कि how come the ideal or India was converted into an ideal colony, and that's how India became so and so, and then Indian industries got disturbed, unemployment got generated, the pressure on the agriculture increased, and that is how we can say ultimately Indian deindustrialization did take place. So in the first part, he'll be writing about those historians, those who have been supporting this idea of deindustrialization, and in the second part, बहुत elaborate नहीं करना है. You have to write about basically the deindustrialization. Sorry, you have to write the arguments against this deindustrialization. Precisely speaking, there are a couple of scholars that should be there, such as Maurice de Morris, the most important one. Maurice de Morris के बिना वो आंसर complete नहीं होगा. ठीक है. There was another scholar, that scholar is Vera Enstray. ठीक है. That also you can write. David Thompson also you can write. So these are couple of scholars that you can quote here, and by quoting them, they have refused, they have negated that any deindustrialization has happened. You do not have like a greater scope to write all their arguments, but then they have rejected on this ground that actually Indian market also expanded simultaneously and there was greater scope even for Indian manufactured stuff. Maybe they were not being exported, but then since there was greater possibility of those stuff in India, and that's how they were being consumed in India. Apart from that, there was another major argument put by them that during this particular period, the import of yarn increased in India. That proves that the industrialization, specifically the textile, was yet performing pretty well. That's how it happened. So this is how the second category will be writing. Certain scholars have refused it. And then the conclusion, the conclusion would be coming up. Conclusion would be coming up with what? Like they'll come up with the revisionist scholars, right? Specifically, one name I'll prescribe to you, that's Tirthankar Roy. Tirthankar Roy is saying that it is a very regional phenomena. You cannot generalize it for whole India. And he'll be writing that actually Tirthankar Roy is saying that there are certain parts of India, undoubtedly it experienced deindustrialization. But on the other hand, there were some parts of India that were not in the deindustrialized during this period. And that's how you can conclude it. I hope it's very clear. It's a very straightforward answer. And that's why we're just done with this part. Let's come to this question. Okay. Do you agree that the idea of permanent fixation of land revenue of 1793 in Bengal was highly influenced by the physiocratic school of thinking? Discuss. मैं बार बार आप लोगों से एक बात कहता हूं कि पैटर्न इतना बदला है, ठीक है, क्वेश्चन का. पहले मैक्सिमम पूछ सकता है कि व्हाट आर द फैक्टर्स व्हिच लेड टू द इंप्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ permanent settlement. What was the nature of permanent settlement or the outcomes of permanent settlement? What are they doing now? They have been picking up just one idea, okay, one point. It is just one point. Where is this physiocratic? It is just one point. Why was this permanent settlement introduced in India? Physiocratic ideology is just one point. There were multiple other factors which were there, right? So it is this one idea and they have asked the questions of how many marks? 20 marks. तो थोड़ी जाति तो करते हैं. आपने, मैं यकीन के साथ कह सकता हूं कि जितने लोगों ने शेखर बंदोपाध्याय नहीं पढ़ी है उनको फिजियोक्रेटिक आइडियोलॉजी के बारे में नहीं पता होगा. पहली चीज, जिन्होंने ढंग से पढ़ी है उनको फिजियोक्रेटिक आइडियोलॉजी के बारे में पता होगा. बट देन हाउ मच इज बीइंग रिटन, ठीक है, एक लाइन है फिजियोक्रेटिक आइडियोलॉजी के बारे में लिखा हुआ. इन दैट केस हाउ टू राइट एन आंसर ऑफ 20 मार्क्स. मैं अभी भी बोल रहा हूँ कि when you are reading paper 2, specifically the modern India, you need to open up yourself, expand yourself. और शेखर बंदोपाध्याय की हर वो लाइन इंपॉर्टेंट है और इतनी विजडम होनी चाहिए कि while reading that book you can figure it out कि okay, is there any possibility of a question? And trust me, look at my foundation notes. Whenever I go to this point, I love explaining this point because it's very important. मुझे आज से नहीं, मुझे 5 साल पहले से लगता था कि कभी ना कभी तो ये पूछेंगे, ठीक है, क्योंकि ये आइडिया है. That idea is one of the basic inspiration behind this permanent settlement, right? Anyways, let me discuss that what is this physiocratic ideology. It is basically a French school of thinking, physiocratic ideology. And what was this school? Now, what is the period? 1793. So Europe had been going through certain transformation. That you all understand. You have studied the history of Europe. So Europe itself had been going through certain transformation. And what was the major transformation? Feudalism got finished, right? So once feudalism ended in Europe, what happened to European agriculture? That's a very important question. Now the whole approach towards the agriculture of Europe got changed, specifically in the Atlantic coast, the countries which are falling in the Atlantic coast. So earlier, under feudalism, agriculture was basically very traditional practice. ठीक है, वही tools बड़े basic या primitive हुआ करते थे, खेती का तरीका बड़ा primitive हुआ करता था. लेकिन जब यूरोप में उस समय दूसरी ट्रेंड कौन सी चल रही? It's capitalism, right? So since there was an environment of capitalism, European agriculture also got highly influenced by this capitalist idea. Right now also you know about certain people such as maybe when you are going to your village, there are so many people practicing agriculture. वही धान का सीजन है तो धान कर दिया, गेहूं का सीजन है तो गेहूं कर दिया, खत्म agriculture. But then at the same time you must be noticing some people, they have left their good lucrative jobs and they have gone back to the agriculture, right? And they are practicing agriculture in a very innovative and commercial way. वो धान और गेहूं पैदा नहीं कर रहे, वो अजीब अजीब से, कोई जो है सनफ्लावर उपजा रहा है, ठीक है, कोई और चीज उपजा रहा है जिसके कमर्शियल यूटिलिटी हो, जिससे आप जो है कैपिटल जनरेट कर सके, दैट्स द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट. दिस इज फिजियोक्रेटिक आइडियोलॉजी. सो व्हेन यू हैव ए कैपिटलिस्ट अप्रोच टुवर्ड्स द लैंड, दैट इज फिजियोक्रेटिक आइडियोलॉजी. व्हेन यू ट्रीट द लैंड एज अ कैपिटलिस्ट वेंचर, so if you invest more, you'll generate more. Capitalists यही तो करते हैं, they do not enjoy the profit. Feudal class कैसा होता है? Feudal class ऐसा होता है कि उसने इस साल जो है 1 लाख नॉर्मल रेवेन्यू जनरेट होता था, इस साल उसने 2 लाख रेवेन्यू या 2 लाख प्रॉफिट जनरेट कर लिया, तो वो 2 लाख जनरेट किया था, उस दिन पहले 1 बोतल शराब पीता था, इस बार बोलेगा 4 बॉटल ऑर्डर करो, ठीक है, प्रॉफिट बढ़ गया. So the feudal class always wasted the money. Capitalist class always save the money in order to reinvest it in a venture, and then that's how they are maximizing their profit. The same approach is coming to the land, and that's how European agriculture went through a transformation. Such as now, a couple of movements that you have seen in Europe, such as England, enclosure movement. I hope you remember. Enclosure movement was sorry. What was enclosure movement? इट्स अ न्यू अप्रोच टुवर्ड्स एग्रीकल्चर. ठीक है, ऐसा थोड़ी कि इंडिया में सेंटिमेंट्स है लोगों को लैंड के लिए, वहां पे भी थे, लेकिन लोगों ने उसको सरपास किया, एंड दे डेवलप्ड डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ टेंडेंसी टुवर्ड्स द लैंड. दे स्टार्टेड इंट्रोड्यूसिंग सम कमर्शियल क्रॉप्स, एंड दैट्स हाउ दे स्टार्टेड जनरेटिंग प्रॉफिट, एंड दे आल्सो ट्राइड टू मैक्सिमाइज देयर प्रॉफिट through their agriculture. So basically the same idea was implemented in India through 1793 permanent settlement. How? Because they considered the zamindars as the owner. They created that notion of property right in the land for the first time. That's how they have claimed. Whether it is correct or not, that may be subjective. हमें जाना नहीं है उसमें. So they have created this notion. So they once they thought कि zamindars are declared declared as the owner of the land. So any excessive revenue coming from the land would be going to whom? Jamindar. And that excessive revenue would be motivating the jamindars to deal with or treat with the land in a very different way, and they'll also develop this same ideology. They'll provide some irrigation facilities, they will introduce some commercial crops, and that's how they'll try to generate or maximize their profit. But उनको मालूम नहीं था इंडियन जमींदार क्लास कैसा है, वो यूरोपियन फ्यूडल क्लास से भी ज्यादा खतरनाक है इंडियन जमींदार क्लास, है ना, उसको और मिलेगा तो वो और ज्यादा खर्च करेगा. ठीक है, so basically this is the whole idea that was implemented. So you need to write ki what is this European physiocratic ideology, and how come it was securing the transition from feudalism to a different kind of agriculture. What were the benefits of it, how it's being influenced by mercantilism and then capitalism, and how come the mercantilism was providing this scope to the European farmers to produce the commercial crops in order to generate more profit. That's how the whole approach and the tendency got changed. And then second part, you need to write how come this idea was imitated in India by Cornwallis, what expectations he had from the Indian Jamindari class, and what are the things he was expected to happen in India. But then towards the conclusion, or in the conclusion, you can write ultimately it did not happen. So it is just discussed. So you don't need to go for a critical analysis. तो आपको बहुत ज़्यादा लिखना नहीं, आपको ये explain करके छोड़ देना है. One more thing, sometimes students do ask this question कि हमारे पास इतना कंटेंट नहीं है, तो इतना कंटेंट नहीं है तो फिर आप उसको जबरदस्ती खींचने की कोशिश मत करिए, उसका कोई बहुत फायदा नहीं है. आपके पास जितना कंटेंट है उतना लिखें, बट ऐसा नहीं है कि 20 मार्कर आंसर्स में नहीं लिखा जा सकता था. Fine. The tug of war between the two principles of freedom and control of the press made its influence felt on the colonial rulers' attitude to the press. Discussed. It's a good question they have asked, frankly speaking. And this question I found very innovative. Innovative in what sense, when it comes to the press, right? Basically what happened, now we always study the press with one perspective, right? And what is that perspective? That how come this press was contributing in the Indian freedom war and the freedom struggle of India. But then this is asking the European or the colonial perspective for the press. So you might have noticed one thing, that actually the real content of this question is that you might have realized two aspects of the European press. Undoubtedly the press was not favorable to them. This is correct. हाँ या ना? The press was not favorable to them. Press कैसे favor करेगा? Press तो ultimately was working as a tool for mobilizing people, and that is the reason because of what press was not undoubtedly a sort of not helpful. In fact, it had been creating problems for them. So if they are imposing restriction over the press, that sounds okay. But if they wanted to restrict the press, then what was their compulsion that very frequently they needed to free the press also, and whenever some restrictions were imposed, you'll find that another act is coming, and that act is ultimately freeing the press. तो कहीं ना कहीं कुछ compulsion है. क्या compulsion हो? Mera question, could you get my question or not? That's very important that you got my question. I just told you that being a colonial rule, undoubtedly press was not of great utility. In fact, press was basically an enemy for the colonial rule because it was used as a tool for mobilizing people. So ideally speaking, press must be avoided by the colonial rulers. And it is true that for a very long period of time, they kept on avoiding the press. But if they had been trying to avoid the press, there was no utility, no benefit of press could be noticed for them. In that case, what was the compulsion that they had to free the press also? Like, let's say Vernacular Press Act is coming. When? 1878. So 1878 में जब Vernacular Press Act आता है, उसमें it imposed various restrictions over the vernacular press. 1882 and another act is coming, like it repealed the Vernacular Press Act. जरूरत क्या है? नहीं करते. Very nice. They never accepted that they have colonized India, right? So since they never accepted that they have colonized India, so they had to portray, they have to show the rest of the world that India is not a colony. Rather, the people are enjoying civil liberties even in India. That's point number one. The point number two, nationalist movement had been creating pressure over there. This is the second point. Third, yet the picture was not very clear in Europe, specifically in England, and there were some people still avoiding, or they're still opposing, not avoiding, sorry, this colonization of India, and that's how even their, questions must be also answered, and that is the reason because of what, ultimately they wanted it. Frankly speaking, there was a fourth point also, that press was needed for them also, because that was the only source to know the information. Since at that point of time, the other mediums were not there, and that's how they were also coming to know about the information through the press, and that's how it was important to them. ज़्यादातर जो बड़े ब्यूरोक्रेट्स होते थे, बहुत लेट तक, अभी भी इनफैक्ट मैं बताऊं आपको, मैं कुछ लोगों को जानता हूं, I cannot reveal their names and all, but then they work with a very higher position in the PMO, ठीक है? और उनका सवेरे का काम क्या होता है कि मॉर्निंग में, इनफैक्ट जो इनकी बात कर रहा हूँ वो एक्चुअली फॉरेन अफेयर्स में ही है, ठीक है? तो उनका रोज सवेरे का काम क्या होता है, कम से कम 8-10 न्यूज़पेपर, दैट इज पार्ट ऑफ हिज जॉब. और सवेरे सवेरे 8-10 न्यूज़पेपर लेके पढ़ना उनका काम होता है. क्यों? व्हाट न्यूज़पेपर इज राइटिंग व्हाट, लाइक स्पेसिफिकली इफ इट इज अबाउट रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन इंडिया पाकिस्तान, इंडिया चाइना, इंडिया बांग्लादेश, और फॉर दैट मैटर एनी कंट्री, राइट? तो उनका काम होता है कि क्या छापा है. तो प्रेस इज द मीडियम टू नो अबाउट द information, what is going on in different parts of India. That is how it was there. So basically, it'll be writing that both compulsions were there. At one hand, they needed to impose restrictions over the press because it had been creating problems for them. On the other hand, they were freeing the press also under certain compulsions. These are the core ideas. But then this answer cannot be written without giving some important facts, such as when it comes to the acts which were basically, let's say, imposing restriction. So there are various acts which had been imposing restriction. That's we can say 1799. There was one act was there, and just a second. Yeah, 1799, that's called as Bengal Gazette Regulation. So it imposed certain restrictions. Then the licensing regulation is coming in 1823. Then the Licensing Act of 1857. Then Vernacular Press Act 1878. Then the Newspaper Act in 1908. Indian Press Act 1910. So there are various acts which are coming. All these information will be there in the model end. So don't worry, don't need of writing it. So all these acts are there in order to impose. In fact, Press Act of 1931. Till 1931, they had been trying to put certain restrictions over the press. But at the same time, you can see there were certain acts such as the Metcalfe Act 1835. That's very important. Even it is considered as the Magna Carta of Indian Press. So you can understand from 1835 they were quite conscious. Then the repeal of the Vernacular Press Act 1882. Then Indian Press Emergency Power Act repeal, that's 1922. So that's how one act is brought to put restrictions over the press, and another act was brought to repeal those kind of restrictions. So that remained a perpetual phenomena in India from 1800. That's what we can write. So this is how you have to write. Since you have to discuss, no interpretations or ऐसा नहीं कि बहुत ये चाहिए इसके analysis चाहिए. No such analysis is needed. So basically, when it comes to any scholar like that you can mention. So there are two scholars. Vipin Chandra तो आप सबको पता है कि उन्होंने press के ऊपर जो chapter लिखा है, that was really a very good chapter, right? But one scholar who is precisely talking about it, C.A. Bailey, right? So C.A. Bailey has studied about Indian press, another prominent scholar, and he has written it very efficiently how the press was creating a sort of fear among the colonial people because of what the press was being restricted on regular intervals, right? That's what you can write. Okay, fine. Let's move to the next question. The movement for the linguistic states generated deep apprehension among the nationalist elite. They feared it would lead to the balkanization of India. Examine. I think that's a very easy question, right? So basically, when it comes to when it comes to the statement, there's a very popular scholar that's called as Granville Austin. Okay, that was the person who has not exactly given the statement, but then he has given a very similar statement. So you can mention about him, Granville Austin. एक और है जो linguistic state formation पे बात करते हैं, that's Paul Bross. ठीक है, very very important scholar. ये दो scholars हैं जिसके बारे में बात करते हैं. But post independence से हैं, आप ना भी लिखे तो चलेगा, ठीक है. It is basically asking about the nationalists. They had great amount of apprehension. I hope it's not very tough to understand what sort of apprehension they had. At that point of time when India becomes independent, what was the primary responsibility or the task in front of the leaders of this country, specifically like Nehru? Of course, you need to mention the name of the Nehru. So they all wanted to somehow maintain that unity of India. So you know that there were several problems with Indian nationalism, because so much diversity was present in India, and that's how the people thinking very ideally, they had a vision towards this Indian nationalism. I hope you understand. And in fact, the way you have seen that just before that, India was partisan, and it was partisan on the basis of religion. So ये भी एक क्वेश्चन है कि इंडियन नेशनलिज्म वीक है या कमजोर है, वीक है या पावरफुल है. सभी लोग जोश में आके बोल देते हैं इंडियन नेशनलिज्म जो है वो बहुत पावरफुल है. इंडियन नेशनलिज्म इज वन ऑफ एग्जांपल ऑफ वन ऑफ द वीकेस्ट नेशनलिज्म, ठीक है, बिकॉज यहाँ पे इतनी डाइवर्सिटीज है, बिकॉज ऑफ फॉर दिस वीकनेस इज क्वाइट ऑब्वियस, एंड द पार्टीशन ऑफ इंडिया इज द इज द most applicable example for this. So they were quite aware of this. They have already seen the result of this. That is the reason because of what they wanted to create that sense of unity. And since they wanted to create that sense of unity, that is the reason because of what they never wanted to maintain any particular identity within the country. So why were not they ready to follow this linguistic based division? Because according to them, the moment it has been done, ultimately every particular region which is having a different language would start feeling as an independent part of India, and that is the reason because of what they wanted to stop it. But then you need to discuss about certain things, Sri Ramulu and the formation of Andhra, and the state reorganization committee 1955. ये सब कुछ facts देके आपको लिखना है कि ultimately that was it. This is what they had been thinking. But then in the conclusion you are ultimately going to write कि it did not happen, and ultimately they were forced, because every committee more or less recommended the same thing, and that's the reason because of what ultimately the linguistic reorganization of the state took place. So there's nothing. आसान question है, ठीक है. Okay, coming to the next one. During the Carnatic Wars, the French position, which at one time dazzled the Indian world by its political successes, was destined to end in humiliation and failure. Explain. Language बड़ी है, but बातें बहुत छोटी सी की है इसने, ठीक है. So it is asking about the French failure, right? But then you have to explain it, right? Simple in one direction. You need to write the answer. So during the Carnatic Wars, the French position at one point of time dazzled, right? So you need to write how come the French position was very powerful. So you don't need to write only about the Carnatic War or during the Carnatic War. French had strengthened their position from much earlier times. And in fact, when it comes to the rivalry between or the competition between the French and the English East India Company, frankly speaking, French was much ahead than English East India Company. So they had been following or they had been implementing numbers of mechanisms through which they were trying to make themselves more powerful, such as the way they had been making the nexus with the local powers, the way they had been using the army very frequently for their trade. Local nexus was another important thing. Apart from that, the kind of subsidiary alliance what they had been trying to develop along with with the local powers. So they were somehow making it very powerful. They were making themselves very powerful. So they were ready to go to any label in order to make them powerful. But this question is asking the French position, which was at one time dazzled the Indian world. So dazzled the Indian world means that either you say about the political power or economic power, right, or the even some other sort of diplomacy and all. They had dominated. Okay, they dominated. So the way they had been following numbers of mechanisms because of what they dominated, right? You can also write that the way they were quite capable of appointing Bussy at Hyderabad. That was also one important favorable factor to them. So this is how they were quite dominating. But then at the end, after the Carnatic War, what happened? By the second round, they were performing quite well. But in the third round, all of a sudden, they had to lose it. And once they lost, after that, the French power was finished from India in a very humiliated way, or humiliating way, I must say. As in, duplex was sent, right? Okay. They had to sign a treaty, and as per that treaty, they were only confined to the Pondicherry region. Okay. So this is how, there were so many humiliating treaties were imposed over them. That is how what you need to write. So you have to write how come the French were excelling power initially. During the Carnatic War, they lost their power, and whatever the bases they had, ultimately they lost it. Dupleix was one powerful military commander. He was called back, and finally what happens? Ultimately they had to finish their trade and commerce from this country in a very humiliated way. That is what you need to write in this particular answer. So बहुत simple है, इसमें कोई historiography जैसी चीज चाहिए भी नहीं. It's not needed at all. Okay. नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज अगेन वेरी ट्रेडिशनल क्वेश्चन. ठीक है, क्यों पूछते हैं मुझे अभी भी नहीं समझ में आता है. ये क्वेश्चन छोड़ देना चाहिए उनको. ठीक है, व्हाई हैज द सेफ्टी वॉल्व थ्योरी रिलेटेड टू द फाउंडेशन ऑफ द इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस बीन थॉरोली डिस्क्रेडिटेड बाय द रीसेंट रिसर्चर्स. लैंग्वेज बदल दी है, कहानी तो वही है. ठीक है, अब यहाँ पे लेकिन अल्टीमेटली यू कैन राइट इट by quoting certain names that may help you. पर ठीक है, उसमें ऐसा कोई बहुत important scholars भी नहीं है जिसको mention करके आप ये बोलेंगे कि मेरा आंसर बहुत अच्छा है. You know that it started with the biography of A.O. Hume that was written by William Wedderburn. ये सारे नाम कुछ लिख देंगे तो आपके लिए अच्छा होगा, आपका आंसर थोड़ा बेहतर हो जाएगा. विलियम वेडरबर्न जो उसकी बायोग्राफी लिखते हैं, और उन्होंने कहानी लिखी है, ठीक है, and that कहानी got this concept of safety valve theory. The कहानी of that 7 gurus and then a department collecting some confidential files handed over to the Dharma gurus. The Dharma gurus went to Simla, handed over this file to A.O. Hume. A.O. Hume met with Dufresne and then this conspiracy was planned. सब बकवास है, कहाँ से लिखा पता नहीं. ठीक है, उन्होंने लिखा और इसको लेके जो है कुछ वेस्टर्न स्कॉलर्स ने, लेकिन they have blamed on Congress being a sort of conspiracy, right? You understand what is this conspiracy? That India was ready once again for a equivalent or in fact more powerful revolt than 1857, and that's how if it needed to be stopped in that case, like this conspiracy has to be done. Iska counter argument, all these scholars like either you say Bipin Chandra, Anil Seal and all these scholars have refused this idea and they have said that there is no possibility of it. Rather, they have just given the justification that Dufresne very soon got irritated of Congress. He started criticizing Congress on multiple platforms. That shows that Congress was not the conspiracy. Rather, Congress was basically that lightning conductor which was trying to somehow convey the grievances of the people to the right place or the right person. That is how it was. तो इसमें कुछ नया नहीं करने के लिए, ठीक है, कोई किसी ने नहीं छोड़ा होगा मुझे लगता. Okay, next question is again not a very tough question. It's a very in the very similar light. The emergence of Gandhi signified the Indianization of national movement, analyzed with reference with his early movement between 1917 to 1922. Again, they have changed the language and then they have written it. Okay, they have asked this question. So Gandhi has changed the nature of it, right? So how come? So the Indian freedom movement was precisely an elite movement earlier. It converted into a class, sorry, it was a class movement earlier. It converted into a mass movement because of the Gandhi. Fine. So you have to write कि how come the inclusion of masses were being done. कुछ स्कॉलर्स कोट करें तो आपके लिए अच्छा है. आप स्कॉलर्स में जैसे एक रविंदर कुमार है, इट्स अ वेरी पॉपुलर स्कॉलर, that you can quote Ravinder Kumar. He is the person who has studied mostly the Gandhian movements in India, precisely these movements. The second one is Sahid Amin, very important scholar. I think his writing is called as Event, Metaphor and Memory. That's precisely for Chauri Chaura. But then he has analyzed the popularity of Gandhi. Then you can also write about the Judith Brown. These are those scholars who had analyzed that how come Gandhi is changing the flow of Indian movement. And then you need to write about certain points for like, for because of what ultimately the Indian like, freedom struggle converts into the mass movement. So first, like, you can write about the Gandhian philosophy and Gandhian idea. गांधी बहुत सिंपल बात करते थे, ठीक है, मैं ही कहूँ किसी को चलो गोली मार देते हैं किसी को, यहाँ का डीएम ठीक काम नहीं कर रहा है, गोली मार देते हैं, आप में से कोई आएगा मेरे साथ? नहीं। मैं बोलूंगा चलो धरना देते हैं कहीं पर, तो आप आ जाएंगे। नॉन वायलेंट स्ट्रगल के लिए लोग आ जाते हैं, क्योंकि उनको लगता था कि जो है ज्यादा से ज्यादा पुलिस दो डंडे मारेगी और कुछ नहीं करेगी, चलो खा लेंगे, देश के लिए इतना तो बनता है। So his method was very innovative, right? That is one thing, non-violent. Then Satyagraha was also one USP of his movement. So he somehow got this confidence among the people that whatever you have been asking for, that is your right. So if you have been asking for anything which is your right, in that case, what is wrong in that? So like, somehow that is the Satyagraha. Then like, the way he was like, able to attract the masses. Gandhiji somehow built that image for himself, that he is the mass leader. As in Gandhi, when he came to India, in fact that movement would be also part of it. The first three struggles, Champaran, Kheda and Ahmedabad, the modern scholars, specifically the left scholars, like the subaltern scholars, they desperately write that Gandhiji was very smart. He desperately picked up all these three. Why? Because one was, or in fact two were peasantry issues and one was workers issue. तो यही तो मास है इंडिया का, ठीक है। तो बहुत स्मार्टली उसने उठाया, क्योंकि एक पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम 1917 1918 जो है ये गांधी के लिए पॉपुलर था कि कौन है जो रिप्रेजेंट करता है वर्कर्स को और पेशेंट्स को, एंड द ओनली नेम वाज देयर वाज गांधी। इनफैक्ट कहते हैं कि जब कोई कहीं मूवमेंट जो है कोई किसान किसी को बुलाने आते थे, तो कांग्रेस में जब उनका कद बहुत बड़ा नहीं था तो लोग बोलते थे वो देखो बैठा उधर उसके पास जाओ, वही ये सब इश्यूज लेता है, ठीक है, और लोग चले जाते थे गांधी जी के पास। सो ही हैड क्रिएटेड दैट इमेज फॉर हिमसेल्फ। सो दैट इज आल्सो वन थिंग लाइक व्हिच इज देयर। Maybe some other reasons were also there, like, but they are not very important to be written here. So then you have to write कि how come, like, that Indianization was there. And in fact here you have to write very categorically कि what is this Indianization of movement. So you need to write also, like, this point should have been written earlier only, that earlier that whole India was not participating, rather the character of the Indian freedom movement was quite elitist in nature. And in fact you can write certain weaknesses of it, the way they had been demanding the things which were fulfilling the aspirations of the elite class, right? Or else, like, the way the people, those who were forming India, the workers, the peasants, like, they were not being included in any of the demands of the, like, Congress. And that's how you can write that ultimately they were not part of it. So couple of movements that you need to mention here, that includes all the three smaller movements, that anti-Rowlatt Act movement, then the Ahmedabad and non-cooperation and खिलाफत मूवमेंट। तो ये सब रेफर करके लिखना है। 2-3 स्कॉलर्स अगर आप इसमें लिखते हैं तो आपका काम हो जाएगा, उससे ज्यादा और लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है। दैट्स मोर देन एनफ। फाइन। Okay, the tension between cultural revivalism and modernization saved the trajectory of the socio-religious reform movement in 19th century India. Okay, that question is not, I'll say, very unique kind of question, but then undoubtedly this question is bit innovative. There's one scholar, like, called as Gail Minault, ठीक है, is G-A-I-L, Gail Minault, M-I-N-A-U-L-T, Gail Minault, उसके स्टडी से ये लिया गया है, ठीक है। Gail Minault. Okay. The tension between the cultural revivalism, that is what? Revivalist and the modernization. What are they? Reformist. Saved the trajectory of the socio-religious reform movement in 19th century India. It's a very simple question. So in India you can find that there are two different kind of trends in the reform. One is reformist. Reformist means Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Rana Day and all these people. Why are they reformists? They were modernists. They wanted to simply modernize India. And what was the meaning of modernization for them? Westernization was the modernization. And that's how they wanted to replace this society. In fact, they were more inspired by what? Utilitarian ideology. The utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham and all, they had been saying, look, Indian society is a rotten society and the complete social engineering is needed. What is that social engineering for them? The social reformation movement. And that is how their method of reform was very different. That these are the things that you need to write. Their method of reform was what? Like, pass or somehow pressurize the government, request the government to pass an act for abolishing that particular social level, such as Sati Act, Widow Remarriage Act, Slavery Abolition Act, and so on. So that was their method. But on the other hand, there was another thing going on parallelly, that was about the cultural revivalism. So it is not only a political act, but a social, it was a social act also. So there are two different ways of defining nationalism at that point of time. One, that if you become modern, if you become like Western, in that case, like this is the indicator of the West modernity. On the other hand, some people believe, if you revive your culture, that is the real freedom from the colonization. So some people had been talking about it. There are two fellows precisely represented this ideology, was Dayanand Saraswati and Swami Vivekananda. So they believed that there is no flaw with the Indian society. Indian society is undoubtedly a very unique and very ideal society, and in fact we need to just revive it, and that's what they had been talking about, the revivalism. So they are saying the tension between the cultural revivalism and the modernization. So undoubtedly these two are having the same objective, but the methods were very different, and that's why there was a tension. And that is the reason because of what Indian reformation, in Indian social reformation, you can find the multiple trends that could be noticed. So you can find that at one hand, some people are trying to get the reforms through the act. Some people were trying to bring the reforms by reviving the ancient ancient culture and the ancient traditions, right? And that's how they had been opposing all these acts, such as let me tell you, Radhakant Dev. Radhakant Dev himself is a reformer, but Radhakant Dev was had been opposing the Sati Act, Sati Abolition. उसने बहुत vehemently अपोज किया था कि ऐसा कैसे हो सकता है, आप नहीं बना सकते हैं. सो वो जो क्यों कहते हैं कि ट्रेजेक्टरी डिसाइड कर रहे हैं, इसलिए क्योंकि जो है वो टेंशन है इंडिया के बीच में, ठीक है. तो एक है जो कल्चर ब्रह्म समाज. ना ब्रह्म समाज वाज अ वेरी रैडिकल मूवमेंट. ब्रह्म समाज वाज वन ऑफ द pioneer or one of the early, let's say, torch bearer for the Arya Samaj. At that point of time, Brahma Samaj was Brahma Samaj had been negating or ignoring all the Hindu principles, and they had been saying we do not believe in that. Kesav Chandra Sen, who was one of the most innovative person, now this fellow had outrightly rejected the Hindu principles, and he said if any boy and girl they are in affair or they are liking each other, in that case come to us and we'll get you married without any temple, without any pujari and all. So it was somehow one trend which was making it very very rational, right? On the other hand, some other people those who were not very radical, not rational, radical. They were not very radical. Rather, they also wanted the reform in the society, but their process was very different. And that's how we can say in India, you find the implementation of social reformation movement in multiple ways. And it was all because of that tension. It is precisely this question has been asked because of the tension which was there in Bengal itself. ठीक है. एक तरफ आप देखेंगे ब्रह्म समाज, दूसरा जो है हेनरी बिपिन तेरेजियो का जो है कौन सा मूवमेंट था, यंग बंगाल मूवमेंट जो है, ये सब कैसे बड़े रैडिकल्स है, ठीक है. ऑन द अदर हैंड पीपल लाइक राधाकांत देव एंड ऑल, दे वर वेरी ट्रेडिशनल तो दे आल्सो वांटेड, उनको भी हम रिफॉर्मर की ही कैटेगरी में रखते हैं, क्योंकि दैट फेलो हैड बीन ए ग्रेट सपोर्टर और आर्डेंट सपोर्टर ऑफ द वुमेन एजुकेशन एंड ऑल. But then the differences were there. So this is what you need to write in this particular answer, कि दो अलग-अलग trend हैं, and because of what you find that multiple methods of the social reformation appeared in India. Gail Minault is I believe that he is the most important person that should be mentioned. इससे ज़्यादा की जरूरत मुझे लगती नहीं. Okay, next question is again a very simple question. In what ways did the tribal and the peasant uprisings of the 19th century contribute to the rise and growth of nationalism in India? Fine. So this is undoubtedly, again, if you read Sekhar Bandapata, you'll find a very good insight of this question. So undoubtedly, this is a question asked from the subaltern perspective, right? So किसका नाम 100% आएगा, उनके बिना ये आंसर लिख ही नहीं सकते हम. That answer cannot be written without Ranjit Guha, right? So उनका नाम तो आना ही आना है रंजीत गुहा का इस आंसर में. तो रंजीत गुहा, आप सुमित सरकार भी मेंशन कर सकते हैं. He himself is writing with subaltern perspective. But then question is not asking about that. The question is asking how did they contribute for the rise of this nationalism? So let me tell you very frankly, there were 3-4 scholars that should be their part, part of your answer. One is Ranjit Guha. Second one is, as I told you, Sumit Sarkar. The third is very important. That's Partha Chatterjee, right? Partha Chatterjee be important as well, and I'll tell you that what exactly they have suggested. And one more name was there. I'm just missing the name. ठीक है, एक और मेरे दिमाग में अभी आया था, अभी just आया था, वो चला गया फिर कहीं, ठीक है. आ जाएगा थोड़ी देर में तो बता दूंगा, ठीक. Okay, what is it? So basically we'll be writing a brief introduction of the various peasantry movements that happen in India, ठीक है. So there were multiple peasants movements that happen in India, and in fact not only the peasant movement but even the tribal movement. So a brief factual description would be sufficient for it. Then you need to write ki how come the nature of these movements were changing. Specifically, you can create a divide pre-1857 and post-1857. There was one scholar, that scholar is Catherine Gough. Now she writes about how come the nature of these revolts are changing from here to here. That scholar was Sahid Amin. Okay? Sahid Amin himself is a subaltern scholar, and he writes a lot about the mobilization among the peasantry community. What you need to write in this answer, how come the nature of the peasantry in the tribal rebellions were changing from here to here. So here I'll just tell you one word, they were pre-political. Now the moment I say pre-political, it means they had numbers of factors, they had numbers of factors because of what they are going for these revolts, such as they had immediate anger on something, or grievances, no mobilization, religion was used as a tool for the mobilization, no vision, no middle class role was there, and that's how it was not very united one. There was no no mobilization beyond the region. So that's why you read most of the revolts and uprisings with the name of their district. Rangpur Dinajpur rebellion. Why it's being called as Rangpur Dinajpur rebellion? Because it was confined to a place. It was not a peasantry rebellion. It was a rebellion by the peasant in a precise place that's called as Rangpur and Dinajpur. These are two districts basically. So understand the point. There was no mobilization in the name of peasant. Rather, it was confined in a particular territory. Right? The nature changes here, and it becomes what? It becomes political. It becomes political. It means that all those features have started coming into this. As in, now they became more organized. They had a method to collect the funds. They were choosing somebody as the leader. First, they were trying to adopt the political mean of the revolt, such as they were filing the cases and all. And then only they had been if the issue is not being resolved through that, then only they were going for the violent movements and all. So that's how nature was changing. Middle class role is coming, such as you see the example you can quote here, such as Indigo Rebellion. Okay? Now Indigo Rebellion will find that they did not want for a violent rebellion in the beginning. Rather, what they did, they started filing cases against the indigo planters in the British judicial system, and once no solution was being provided, then only they went for some violent method. Right? They had been targeting first what? The British flag, and once they are targeting the British flag, if we'll talk about this tribal movement, even in the tribal movements, do you know Birsa Munda has been calling the Elizabeth, or had been comparing Elizabeth with Mandodari, jo Ravan ki wife hai. Now, these are the things which are proving something. First of all, I just told you that they were calling Elizabeth, or they had been comparing Elizabeth with Mandodari. It means that they got the idea of the exploitation through this colonization. That's what. Otherwise, you just imagine that illiterate people are targeting Elizabeth. How come it is possible? It's possible due to this reason, because of what? They developed a better understanding of the colonization. Now, the second thing I told you, that they targeted the British flag. Whenever they attacked on any office, what they did, first they removed the flag, and then only they did anything. They were not more interested in killing people, rather they were more interested in burning the papers, right, looting the godowns. So the nature of it is changing. So according to all the subaltern scholars, what was it? It was a gradual transition of these movements, not only from pre-political to political, rather from early nationalist to nationalist. Now they were gradually developing the sense of India, and that's how people like Birsa Munda and all had been called as the first nationalist in India. ठीक है? तो आप इन्हीं subaltern scholars का हवाला देते हुए बताएंगे, subaltern और कुछ और scholars जैसे पार्था चटर्जी. हाँ, एक और important part. Here you'll talk about that how come they contributed for the growth of this nationalism. These are the people coming from the roots of India, and that's how they retained that culture. Otherwise, the elite class had given up that Indian roots. Now they are dressed like the Western people, right? So they are speaking English. So when it comes to nationalism, there should be some elements, some Indian elements. How to retain? Who retain these Indian elements? These are the people. The peasants and the tribals had been retaining the Indian elements. How? Like, they were maintaining the same culture, same food, food patterns, their own languages, and then we can say apart from the languages, we can also talk about the clothing pattern and everything. So they remain precisely Indian in nature, not the elite class, and that's how Partha Chatterjee says that Indian nationalism is a cultural nationalism. Why cultural nationalism? Ultimately, this is this subaltern class retain that Indian culture because of what it happened. I hope it's clear. Okay, okay, fine. I think this is the last question. Oh, yes. Discuss the major initiatives taken by the government of India for the removal of caste injustice and inequality after 1947. A full-fledged factual questions, right? So how this answer should have been started by you. So you can start this answer with some of the problems that appeared immediately after the independence, and in fact, caste has become one of the primary question in front of the the authorities of India, right? And that is how they thought of resolving this question as soon as possible. So pahli effort kya hai isme? What is the first effort made by them in this line? कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का आना ही सबसे पहला है, ठीक है. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ला रहे इसका मतलब है कि you have been accepting theoretically the concept of equality. So you'll start the answer with the the constitution, and then precisely you can write such as the preamble hai, then the article 17, the fundamental rights, that's like an abolition of untouchability that has been categorically mentioned, then equality before the law, that is article 14 to 16, then the protection discrimination, there were certain acts like article 330, 335, 340, जितना याद रहे उतना ही लिखना है, ठीक है. मेरे सामने है, मैं बोल रहा हूँ, that's a different thing. मुझे भी उतना याद नहीं है, frankly speaking. तो ऐसे ही आपको Untouchability Offence Act 1955, Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribe Prevention and Atrocities Act 1989, then Prohibition of Employment as Manual Scavengers Act 1993, 2013. So these acts are there. जितने याद है उतने मेंशन कर देने, ठीक है. That is all about this, like the modern people. So I hope the clarity is there. Now, do you really believe that there was any question which was literally very tough question? No, I don't think so, frankly speaking. Maybe you are having lesser understanding, lesser facts, but the questions were doable. This is what I have been telling you, ठीक है. आप कितना बेहतर लिखते हैं ये तो थोड़ा सब्जेक्टिव है, ठीक है, और वो आप बेहतर बता पाएंगे कि आपके पास कितनी अच्छी इन्फॉर्मेशन है. बट हाँ, मुझे लगा कि जो है हाँ करने लायक क्वेश्चंस थे. Okay, let's move to the next question, next part, that is section B. I don't know, again in the world segment, I find the questions were quite doable. Let's see. The French Revolution started and led to the victory of its first phase by the aristocracy, right? Simple question. That statement has been taken as it is by the book of Albert Sobol, right? One of the most prominent author of on French Revolution. और हम आज भी यूनिवर्सिटी में जब फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन पढ़ाते हैं तो द ओनली बुक विच इज द गीता बाइबल एंड कुरान फॉर द फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन इज अल्बर्ट सोबोल. और इतने डायमेंशन से उन्होंने बात किया हुआ है अल्बर्ट सोबोल की बुक में. इनफैक्ट फेमिनिज्म जैसे एस्पेक्ट्स भी जो है उसमें बहुत अच्छे से एक पूरा चैप्टर है कि रोल ऑफ वुमेन इन फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन. सो लाइक अनडाउटेडली द ब्यूटीफुल बुक. द क्वेश्चन इज वेरी सिंपल. द क्वेश्चन इज सिंपली टॉकिंग अबाउट दैट द एज फार एज दिस question is concerned, his question is saying that the first phase was basically empowering which class? The aristocracy class. That is true also, because when it comes to the third state, it is not being composed of, let's say, only one section, right? It is having some rich and the aristocratic class also, big businessmen, merchants, and all these people. On the other hand, it had proletariat people also. And when it comes to the first phase, that the first phase is mainly led by some this people from this this kind of this group, such as you might have heard of Lafayette is there, Mirabeau is there. These people are there. So वो lead करे, and that's how after this you can find that certain solid or concrete decisions were taken, such as the abolition of feudalism, right? The Constitution of 1791, the political clubs were being formed. but ultimately who who were benefited out of this? The aristocratic class, because the franchisee did not become universal, right? And in fact the struggle continued for the peasants and the workers. So this is how we'll be writing that first phase of the revolution somehow got the success only for the aristocratic class. But then it is the here you have to go for critical analysis. So you'll be writing ki maybe in the first stage it happened the way it is written, but it does not mean ki the impact should be noticed only with respect to the aristocratic class, because somehow it motivated the proletariats or the working classes also to achieve franchisee and all these kind of things. And that's how this particular movement continued even further, and finally all these demands were achieved by them. That's how we'll be writing even the critical dimension. Okay. This is with the Reform Act of 1832 begin an activity in reconstructing legislation to which there had been no parallel in British history. Okay, so this has been asked from question from 1832 reforms, constitutional reforms, or the democratic reforms from the from Britain. This has been picked up by again a very famous scholar called Trevelyan, again very famous scholar of the world history. He is falling in the category of liberal scholar. समझ सकते हैं कि कोई liberal ही ऐसे बात कर सकता है. 1832 was not greatly successful, as you all know, but then 1832 yet is very important with respect to multiple things. So now what do you need to write? You have to simply write कि what are the transformations or what are the achievements there of the 1832 Reform Acts, such as the redistribution of the political power, the end of the rotten boroughs, the extension of the franchisee, the legislative independence, these are certain things which were brought. Apart from that, certain more acts were coming or becoming part of it. So undoubtedly it is a beginning of a process of reconstructing the reconstructing legislature. That is to a certain extent true. But whatsoever we had been discussing just now for the French Revolution, I think the same ideas are there here also. When we will talk about this particular movement, somehow it could not get any great success for the proletariats. Neither the franchisee became universal, right? Nor the women liberation was being supported, nor the precise demands which were there, they were being fulfilled. And in fact, all these things are happening, but they're happening slightly late. So there were some more revolutions, failed revolution, 1848 I have been talking about, sorry, 1842, and then further some more revolutions are happening. And then gradually, they have been going for certain other acts. And that is how, we can say it had just initiated the process, but the completion of this process is taking longer time. That's what you need to write. Okay. So next question is, the First World War did not produce just political consequence, it also had a deep impact on the ways of thinking. Critically examine. Compulsory question hai, so you need to go for the critical analysis. That statement has been picked up from E.H. Carr's book. Not what is history. E.H. Carr ने एक ही किताब नहीं लिखी है, थे और भी किताबें लिखी है. ठीक है, तो E.H. Carr is also a Marxist historian. हालांकि बाद में थोड़ा deviate कर जाते हैं Marxism से. So he has written the history of this part basically. Fine. Not a very tough question. Okay. So he says that it is not having a political impact. So you have to write certain political impacts in brief. Okay, these are the political impacts. I don't need to tell you that what are the political impacts. You have to talk about, right? But then frankly speaking, according to E.H. Carr, this was even having certain impacts, ideological impact. And in fact, many of the ideologies which were there prior to it, First World War, they got completely changed. Such as earlier people believed in the concept of international cooperation. Now people have started realizing that there is nothing as such cooperation, because even though if they are accepting that concept of cooperation and First World War may take place, in that case, how to believe in this cooperation, right? Then people were believing in capitalism, right, prior to the First World War. But then they realized that no, it was the capitalism which gave birth to the First World War, right? That's how this idea got also changed. And people started believing in the concept of communism. That became very popular. In fact, immediately after the First World War, there was a threat that maybe majority of the countries could convert into a communist country, right? Then fascism like fascism, Nazism. Then the anti-colonial nationalism, because now the colonies also became very conscious, and that's how in multiple countries, either in Asia or Africa, they be like they got inspired by this nationalist idea. So these are some of the some of the major changes that you find in the world, right? In fact, I can say here onwards you can find about the radicalization of the masses. Even in literature, you can find that the literature became changed drastically. That was also one change, such as some one scholar you can mention, writer you can mention, that's Ernest Hemingway. Like he wrote one book, that's Lost Generation, and that's how literature was also having a change after the First World War. So these are some of the greater changes that could be noticed. But the question is that here you have to go for a critical analysis. So iska matlab hai ki you need to write the same some of the continuity of the old ideas or the old regime, right? So when it comes to the continuity of the old ideas, though there are so many new ideas they are coming up, but does it mean that they become the prominent ideas? Not really. Such as when you say about capitalism, that continued in the world, right? As far as the factionalism in the world is concerned, they also continued. Colonization, they continued, and real decolonization happens only after the Second World War, not before the not after the First World War. So this is how we can say that most of the scholars some scholars do talk about the ideological shift, but then greatly the scholars like Eric Hobsbawm and all, they accept most of the things have continued in the same manner. There was no great change as such can be noticed after the First World War. Okay, let's move to the next question. In the Soviet Union, as also in China, there was a strong belief that anti-imperialist movement in the colonies would result in their moving into the socialist orbit. Surprisingly, this is asked in the world history, but that statement has been given by Bipin Chandra itself. ठीक है, तो बिपिन चंद्रा का स्टेटमेंट, और ये फ्रैंकली स्पीकिंग वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री से है भी नहीं, ये ज्यादा जो है इंडियन हिस्ट्री से है. व्हाट इज द क्वेश्चन सेइंग ऑल अबाउट? सो इन द सोवियत यूनियन, as also in China, there was a strong belief that the anti-colonial, anti-imperial movements in the colonies would result in their moving into the socialist orbit. You know that most of the people, specifically, there are two persons I'll say. One is the Soviet Union, right? So Lenin and all, they were believing, and in fact in China also, Mao, they were believing actually all these colonies, since they were the result of capitalism, and that's how they would be disillusioned from the capitalism, and they'll incline towards socialism, right? So, and in fact, they had been doing so many things in this direction, such as if we'll talk about Soviet Union. So, you know about the Comintern, International Comintern. So, that was an organization in order to attract the countries, the colonies towards Then the Lenin's theory, you know about the his theory for the anti-imperialism, and then the proletariat internationalism. Then the we can say some practical outreach. So the parties were also being formed, and these parties were being formed through their support, such as CPI, Communist Party of India. The Communist Party of India was getting the backup from them, and wo merit conspiracy, Peshawar conspiracy, ye sab conspiracy suna hoga. There were certain communists, they had been trying to enter through Pakistan to India, and they were caught in Pakistan, and that is known as the Peshawar conspiracy case. So they were trying to support it, right? So this is how we can say Russia was giving great amount of support, and the same was being done by China also. So the Mao's theory is being popularized, and then Mao's theory was that actually if revolution needed to be created in any country, either it is anti-colonial, right? It can be done through the peasants, and that's how he was trying to mobilize the peasants in all the colonies, and they believed that through the mobilization of peasants, the countries could be freed. Apart from that, he was one of the ardent supporters of the guerrilla warfare, and he had been provoking the people in the anti-colonial struggle to go for these kind of things. Okay? That's how you have to write how come they had been supporting. So not only they believed, they were having several acts also to promote or to bring the countries towards communism, right? Then you have to go for a critical analysis, right? So you'll be writing though there were several efforts done by them, ultimately majority of the countries have refused. So as you all know that there were only very few countries, such as Vietnam is there, Cuba is there, Mozambique is there. ये 3 countries है जिसने आजादी के बाद socialism को अपनाया था. बाकी सारे countries ने they have followed this non-alignment movement, right? So they preferred not to be part of anybody, and that's how we can say that this idea was there, but somehow it was not a very successful idea. It was just there in the terms of ideas, and later on majority of the countries converted into a capitalist country itself, right? Okay, next, The pre-Marxian socialism thinkers envision socialist societies without fully considering the practical mechanism for achieving or maintaining, right? Maintaining them. I hope it's a very simple question. Statement is not picked up from any particular place. Rather, I'll say it is sort of an idea given by Marx and Engels only, right? So they believed that there was one socialism or idea of socialism which is called as the pre-Marxian socialism, and that has been called by them. It was Engels only who called the pre-Marxian socialism as utopian socialism, right? So you have to just write about the people, those who had been giving the pre-Marxian socialism. That included Saint-Simon is there, right? And then Fourier is there, Robert Owen is there, and Proudhon is there. ये 4-5 लोग हैं जिन्होंने pre-Marxian socialism दिया. And you need to talk about that. What are the basic or the central ideas? How come they had been talking about a sort of voluntary socialism, voluntary socialism, that they should go for, they should have the idea of welfare of the people, self-sufficient communities, and then model industry villages. These are certain ideas being said by them, and ultimately the Marxist scholars, including Marx and Engels, have outrightly negated it. And on what ground they have been calling it utopian? Because the main idea can be answered through this. They had been calling them utopian because they, or all these scholars, those who have talked about pre-Marxian socialism, they have never discussed about the process through which this socialism is going to come. आप कहेंगे कि जो है एक इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट जो है वो इतना भला हो जाएगा एक दिन कि जो है वो लोगों का भला करना शुरू कर देगा, मतलब पूरा एकदम ड्रास्टिक चेंज हो जाएगा. वो बोलेगा ला जाओ सारे मेरे पैसे ले जाओ, तुम लोग अच्छे से खाओ पियो, मेरी खुशी उसी में है, ठीक है. ऐसा नहीं होता ना, ये तो बहुत यूटोपियन आइडिया है. ऐसा सिर्फ बॉलीवुड के सिनेमा में होता है, और नहीं, मैंने कहीं नहीं देखा है कि एकदम हीरो आखिरी 3 घंटे तक कहानी में विलन होता है और आखिरी के 2 मिनट में विलन एकदम से हृदय परिवर्तन हो जाता है. ऐसा लगेगा कि जो है नेक्स्ट जो है सन्यासी वही होगा, ठीक है. Practically it does not happen. So they have criticized the pre-Marxian socialism on this ground. And as you all know that Marx and Engels have actually discussed that what is the right way of bringing this socialism. So he talks about this proletariat revolution, right? So you need to write about that. That is all about this question. Okay. Nationalism in the 19th century was a driving force for both integration and disintegration. Illustrate with examples from European and other parts of the world, right? So this question is saying that nationalism in the 19th century was a driving force for both integration as well as disintegration. This line has been taken from the book of Erich Hobsbawm. Again, ज़्यादातर जो statements है वो सारे popular जो किताबें हैं 4-5 उसी से उठाई गई हैं. मैंने एक चीज देखा, so इसमें से लिए गई है. And in fact, the only complicated part that they have been asking for the examples, right? It is also not very tough to find. So in fact, Erich Hobsbawm himself talks about that nationalism was dual in character. There is a theory given by him that's called as the dual character of nationalism. And what is this dual character of nationalism? It does both integration as well as disintegration. So it is dealing with both ideas. Okay, fine. So when it comes to the integration, kya examples are? Germany, Italy, integration. When it comes to disintegration, Austria, Hungary, right, Ottoman Empire, these are the examples of the disintegration. So these are the European examples. European examples se bahar baat kare, Japan, Meiji Restoration. What is it? Integration under the nationalism, right? In fact, as far as the integration is concerned, India could be one of the best examples of the integration, right? Undoubtedly. So integration is there. On the other hand, we can talk about disintegration. So we can talk about Spanish America. ठीक है? Spanish America में जो है वो disintegration दिखता है वहाँ पे. या फिर आप you can use even Ottoman Empire. I think मैंने पहले भी बात की. So Ottoman Empire is there. So you just need to pick up the examples of these, and you have to write how come it facilitated both integration as well as disintegration. Right? Any doubt? The American Revolution in many respects a manifestation of the Enlightenment in political, civil and ecclesiastical sphere. Explain. Okay. Okay, fine. So this question is basically what? This question has been taken from very less common book that's called as R.R. Palmer. उसमें से statement ली गई है. Now the question is that the American Revolution in many respects manifestation of Enlightenment in three different areas. Like, basically it is saying ki political, wo hai, it's an enlightenment in the political area, then civil area, and then religious area. These three things they have been talking about. Fine. So you just need to write. You don't need to go for a great amount of analysis. The biggest tail word is explain. So आपको just explain करना है. So what you are going to write? Political sphere. So multiple changes have been brought by them. ठीक है. So they are they are the first people to frame a constitution. The constitution is result of that. They talked about the natural rights for the first time, the popular sovereignty, republicanism, right? These are some of the ideas are coming, and in fact they were first who had been formally adopting it, right? When it comes to the civil sphere, right, they were the first people who accepted the concept of the individual liberty. So though it was already being discussed in Europe, but nobody could implement it, the Americans were first to implement it, right? Equality before the law, the education and rationality, these are the certain important ideas what they have done. And in field of religion, I think you all know that America, people always had the freedom to follow their religion. In fact, America was settled by many such people who wanted to follow the religious freedom. ठीक है, इसीलिए जो है हम उसके माइग्रेशन को हम कहते हैं, जो लोगों का माइग्रेशन है उसको हम कई बार रिलीजियस माइग्रेशन से कंपेयर करते हैं, because all those people not getting the freedom to follow their own religion in Europe, they migrated to America because there was a freedom to follow their own religion, and that's so after the independence America followed this nature. So these are the three different things we'll be writing in point format and we'll be showing ultimately with this. Okay, next question. Did new imperialism represent a continuation of the old colonial practices, or did it mark a fundamental shift in the global power structure? Again, it is a debate among scholars, right? So there are a couple of scholars, they believe that there was basically there was a continuity from the old colonization to the new new imperialism, and some people say there was a shift. The scholars who has suggested is scholars John Gallagher, very famous scholar, and Hopkins. ये दो famous scholars हैं, those who have been saying there was a continuity, there was no massive change from the colonization to new imperialism. On the other hand, people like Hobson and Hobsbawm say there was a greater shift. Now, what is this continuity and what is this shift? So first of all, you need to define that what is old colonization and what is new imperialism. So in 16th to 18th century, you find that this was old colonization, where mercantilism, the conquest of America, then trading post of ये सब जो होते हैं वो है. New imperialism is basically the rapid expansion of European control on Africa, Asia, and some other parts of the world. So these are two different things. Okay, fine. So when it comes to the continuities, so you know that continuity in multiple aspects, such as ultimately the exploitation remain the main character of it. Usme bhi hai. Then the racial and the cultural superiority, that also continued. So they yet believe that the white people are culturally more superior, and that's how they are having the right. Violence and the coercion. Okay. So not only the previous one, the next one also remain the violent and the coercion. Okay. Then commercial motivation, that I told you the economic benefits they had been always looked. But it does not mean that there was no shift. Now this one, it was guided by the industrial capitalism, right? Earlier one was guided by mercantilism. This one was guided by the industrial capitalism. This one, the new imperialism, is known for the speed and the scale. Undoubtedly, the previous one was limited. Now it was there was a rivalry that could be noticed among the European countries in order to make the colonies under this new imperialism, right? Geopolitics, right? So now it has literally become important that where exactly you have the a colony, and in fact all the European, not all the European countries, sorry, the important European countries, they tried to have the colonies almost all in all the path. छोटे ही सही, लेकिन वो colonization उनका होना चाहिए, ठीक है? State control. Now earlier what happened? Some companies were also controlling it. In majority of the times you find that the companies or the individual were controlling it. Now it was precisely the control by the state. And then yes, in the second one you can find that now they had been trying to justify it ideologically. They had been given separate logics, different logics, that whatever they have been doing, actually the exploitation is not part of it. And then all these kind of ideas that they are doing it for the welfare of the people, white man's burden and all. मतलब एक दुनिया की world community को एक justification भी देते हैं. And that's of both the aspects are there. And as I have already discussed, there are certain scholars that you can mention here, right? Okay. Next, by the time of 1932 elections, Germany's ruling classes begin to feel that the only way to escape from a deep economic crisis was to hand over the political power to a totalitarian agency, explained. So it's about coming of whom? Hitler, right? So this statement has been taken by, again, a very popular scholar calls his book A.J.P. Taylor. सबने सुना होगा मेरे हिसाब से A.J.P. Taylor का नाम, ठीक? So you have to write कि Germany had been going through certain crisis. What sort of crisis? Political crisis and economic crisis. आपको लिखना है कि that crisis was the reason because of what they have decided to bring somebody in power who was believing in totalitarian principle, right? So you'll be writing about the Weimar Republic, right? How come it was failing? How come it was disintegrating? The new parties were emerging in India. So political fragmentations was there. Extremist parties like Nazis and the communists were like, they were emerging. And most importantly, frankly speaking, Germany was very scared at that point of time. It is quite possible that the communism would enter deeply into Germany. And that's since they wanted to avoid the communism in Germany, that's how they wanted somebody, powerful person or powerful ruler. That is one thing. Economic collapse, after the First World War, what happened to Germany, I don't need to tell you. So undoubtedly that is also there. Now certain new changes were also there, like a very aspiring middle class was appearing in Germany. And this middle class wanted like, अभी मैं क्या बोलूं, छोड़ो, ठीक है, मिडिल क्लास के अपने एस्पिरेशंस होते हैं, वो चाहते हैं कि उनकी चीजों को जो करे उसको पार्टी में लेके आना चाहिए, सॉरी पावर में लेके आना चाहिए. एंड दैट इज द थिंग व्हिच रिजल्टेड इन द इलेक्शंस ऑफ 1932. नाजीज केम इनटू द पावर एंड इन फैक्ट दे गॉट 37% वोट. इट वाज ग्रेट डिफरेंस. दे मैनेज्ड टू डिफीट द डेमोक्रेटिक पावर्स बेसिकली. सो ये कोई हिस्टोरियोग्राफी वगैरह इसमें नीडेड नहीं है. दैट्स द थिंग. ओके फाइन. Next is discuss critically the salient features of the Mikhail Gorbachev's domestic reforms. A simple factual questions like so you just need to write about certain reforms introduced by Mikhail Gorbachev, right? Such as the perestroika, that is economic restructuring. So उसके points आपको लिखने पड़ेंगे, जैसे how come they limited market mechanisms in socialist economy, allowed cooperative small scale private industries, and all these things then Glasnost, that is political and the social openness, right? That was introduced by them. Then the political democratization, right? So that was also opened by them. Then the acceleration of the development, anti-alcohol campaign, devolution of the power to the republic. So these are certain things which were introduced by him, right? But then you have to go for a critical analysis. It means that you have to write about the failure. So somehow nothing could become very successful, such as economic reforms were half-hearted, complete energy or was not invested for bringing these reforms. Then we can say, some other problems were also there, such as economic crisis appeared, the political fragmentation happened, and ultimately this led to the eventual disintegration of Russia in 1991. That's what okay. Next one is anti-clericalism of the Enlightenment echoed in the sentiments of the Renaissance and the Reformation, yet it neither endorsed the paganism of the Renaissance nor did it share the faith of Reformation. Okay, this question has been simply saying ki as far as this idea of anti-clericalism is there, which was there not only in Renaissance and Reformation, that even echoed in Enlightenment also. It was there. That idea is that idea is there. But when it comes to the implementation of these ideas, ultimately it could not happen. This is what the question is saying. So you just need to write about that what are the problems which were there in Europe during the time of Renaissance and Enlightenment. So Renaissance and Reformation. So during the period of Renaissance, you can write about the Petrarch, Erasmus, how come they had been criticizing religion, on what ground they had been criticizing religion, how come the reason is being listed, and according to the reason of the rationalism, religion could not have been accepted by them. So how come they wanted to free the people from the superstition and all these kind of things. On the other hand, when it comes to the Reformation, so you know about the Martin Luther King and then and then the Calvin. These people also wanted to free people from the religion, and that's so they have started a sort of religious reform movement. And in fact, they had started highlighting certain flaws which were there in the religion, corruption or ye sari cheeze jo Martin Luther King ke contributions hai. So briefly you can write about that, okay? And then you can write ki how come Enlightenment was supporting these ideas, undoubtedly, because Enlightenment is not only about the political, economic, but even the religious enlightenment, and it could have happened only once people are freeing from the religious dominance or the control. But even though they had this behavior, scientific behavior, and in fact the anti-religious thing, they could not say anything directly for abolition of religion and all. Religion continued as it is. So there was no massive change except certain reforms in the religion that have happened already. This is what, could you get the points and the ideas? Okay. Then the next question is, why did the non-communist Vietnamese leader fail to provide successful leadership for Indo-China's anti-colonial struggle? Discuss. It's a simple, straightforward question. So basically, there were two kinds of leadership which were present in Vietnam. One was basically the non-communist leadership, right? Non-communist, matlab the constitutional party of Vietnam, and the second was the communist leadership. So basically, Ho Chi Minh's Indo-Chinese Communist Party, right? So these are two parties. So it is simply asking that the non-communist Vietnamese leaders fail. It means that you need to write the limitations or the weaknesses of this party because of what they failed. So you have to just write how come they were elitist or urban centric in nature. They had moderate demands. Constitutionalist party had the moderate demands. Like they had certain organizational weaknesses. They were dependent on the foreign models, absence of social programs, colonial repression. So these are a couple of reasons because of what they could not provide. So it's a factual answer. You have to just write couple of points, nothing else. Okay. To what extent did the concept of free trade of European economic community contribute to the formation of European Union exam? Simple question. Okay. So it is simply asking how come the European economic community was formed. So that got formed basically through the Treaty of Rome in 1957. And why did it happen? It is all happening because of the Second World War. So you know that Second World War had created great amount of loss for them, and that's how they wanted to revitalize their economy, and that's how they have been forming. What were the objectives of this? So they wanted to form the custom union, expansion of trade, economic efficiency, spillover effects. These are certain objectives they had. But yet there were certain limitations because of what it could not become very successful. That has been further fulfilled through the European Union. That's what you need to write. Simple hai, ye bhi factual hai. Okay. Examine the impact of the links between the scientific education and industrial expansion on German society in the early 20th century. Again, a very straightforward question, and I'll say that it was again a factual question, as you need to write how come Germany was transforming in 20th century, early 20th century. So there was undoubtedly a close link. So since Germany has realized or recognized the significance of industrialization, and that's how it started a process of industrializing Germany. And industrialization could not have happened until and unless you create a society which is scientific in nature. That is the reason because of what they have started doing so many things. So kya karenge? Like they have started opening so many technical colleges and the universities, such as हमारे यहाँ सबसे basic level पे technical education क्या होता है? ITI. So yes, they have started opening these kind of polytechnic colleges, then the engineering colleges, then industrial research labs were being opened, certain universities were opened, and then so many conferences were being done by them, and then these are certain things which were done by them. So in the education they have got drastic changes, and they made it more scientific, more industrial based education, that they could get the people who could contribute in the development of the industrial sector in Germany. That was the idea. And then finally, ultimately you find that so many impacts, they have been asking the impacts over the society. So there you can write about certain impacts over the society, such as when you promote technology, so some people are becoming technological elites. जैसे आप जितने भी CEO देखते हैं, बोलते हैं ना इंडिया के लोग CEO बन गए, वो सब बहुत अमीर आदमी थोड़ी होते हैं. They are reaching to that position because of their knowledge of the technology, right? So वो एक skill बन जाती है जिसके through you can become powerful. The urbanization is the another important thing. Because of the industrialization, ultimately the middle class is appearing, that too in a very prominent way. That is also one thing. Then that is also one. There was another impact, that is militarization of the industry. So the way the military and the industries came together, and then that's how the militarization of industries. And these are certain changes that could be noticed over the society. So again, it is a factual question, point in the point format you need to write. So frankly speaking, in this particular part, paper 2, मुझे लगता है कि either certain questions were factual, I totally accept it, and without having some solid facts you could not have written the answer, I accept it. But then ऐसा नहीं था कि आंसर्स were not doable, ठीक है, आप कर सकते थे आसानी से, हो सकता है कुछ आंसर्स थोड़े से कम फैक्ट्स की वजह से खराब होते, बट conceptually they were not so deep that you could not have done it, I believe so. So that's all about the paper discussion, right? So I hope like this was quite helpful to you. So thank you very much. Acha, one more thing, like this is my Telegram link. So इसके answers I'll provide you either tomorrow or day after tomorrow. कल एक paper का और परसों एक paper का I'll provide, so you can download it from here. So that's why I didn't ask you to write it down anything. I'll provide it, and I'll provide it in a slightly elaborated manner that you can get certain content also out of your content or historiography. So you can like download it. Thank you very much. Thank you.